I want it to be about life. I want it to be about potential. For so long in sculpture's history, anyway, in the West, it was to do with memorial. And I think that now sculpture has a completely other duty, which is to be a ground in which collectively we can think about our role as creators of the future.
The exhibition here is a very big exhibition, but you've done big exhibitions in London before. There was the Hayward exhibition, many exhibitions. So I wanted to ask you, when this idea of an exhibition at the Royal Academy started, what were the initial thoughts? How did you conceive of it?
I guess that was 5 years ago, and right from the beginning I wanted to make a work in which the body of the viewer was somehow the subject. And at the beginning I was thinking, can we make a room with so much light that it's almost impossible to see? Can we make a room of darkness? Can we make a room of wind? Can we make a room of cold? Can we make a room of heat? So we went through many different ideas for this show. The baby is the beginning of the show and suggests in this courtyard of grand Renaissance architecture that is inhabited by representations of the learned societies that made up the Enlightenment. And we can say, with that baby, it's now saying, well, with the promise of the Enlightenment and rationality, how are we doing? Have we managed to, through rational principles, achieve some fair distribution, either of justice or resources? Well, I think the project is still going, and we haven't.
J.G. Ballard talked about the miracle of life. It has to do with energy. It's also the birth of your daughter.
Yes, it's my daughter Paloma at 6 days. This first room, I wanted to connect with the baby that you saw in the courtyard and just think about the ground, think about raw material, think about the body not as a description, but as a kind of construction. I've deliberately made only 2 relatively standing works. One that leans against the wall, by implication asking you to think about the context of this show. The other, I think of this as a figure looking at the ground, but also that comes from a long tradition, in a way, of the mourning figure. You think of figures at the foot of the cross. In the end, I don't want to illustrate emotion. I would like to feel that these are evocations that might remind you of your own muscle memory of positions that your body has been in, and you'll be able to, in a way, give the feeling that this raw material lacks. I'm very aware that sculpture is still and silent. I want to use its stillness and silence to draw from the viewer everything that we have in terms of thinking, feeling, willing, the potential for movement.
One thing which also struck me is arriving here, seeing the baby outside, then coming into this first room. There's a kind of a micro-macro oscillation happening, because we're in this gigantic courtyard and there is this tiny little sculpture, and then we enter here into the first space. And of course, you talked about these as potential figures, as life forms, yet at the same time, we can see them also as cities. We can see them as maquettes for gigantic buildings. There seems to be something about the micro-macro movement. No?
Scale is a really important, I think, quality of sculpture. And I want our scale to be active as we move through these 13 rooms. I think I would like to think of the whole show as, in a way, a kind of rite of passage. Every room hopefully contradicts the one before, but adds another, in a way, layer. And hopefully, by the time you reach the last room, you have enough raw material to make something of the whole.
We go from the extreme present to the past. Panofsky says the future is often invented with fragments from the past. What was the influence for you from Arte Povera? Also beyond Arte Povera, I was curious, who were the kind of artists you were looking at, you were inspired by at that time of the beginning?
So these are all works from 77 to about 83, so from the period when I was beginning my postgraduate. And yeah, I've already mentioned Carl Andre, and here's my reply again to Carl Andre. So here is a, as it were, industrially produced material, but instead of it just being left in a grid system, I have insisted that there is a life reference. I guess I was just trying to say something very basic about mind and matter. And yeah, I guess with all of these works, trying to find really common materials and things that we all know, but to represent them in a way that makes us think again about time, about growth, about survival. And maybe this work here is the most important. This is Land, Sea and Air. I brought a stone back from the west coast of Ireland in 1977, and I wanted to honor it. Anyway, I covered it in lead, and then I realized, well, I can fill this case. This one has the stone in it, this one is full of water, this one is empty, or filled with air. Then I have, through the agency of lead, transferred something that is present in the world, removed it from perception, but allowed it to be imaginative. And in removing it from perception, I also removed it from time, but also this is the time of protect and survive, the time of the Cold War, the time in which really nuclear Armageddon was the most likely cause of the end of all life on this planet.
So extinction was already, I mean, now we talk, Elizabeth Kolbert actually writes the sixth mass extinction, in the middle of the sixth mass extinction, extinction of species, extinction of cultural phenomena. But of course, that whole spectrum of extinction was already present then.
Well, I call these seeds of the future because I was thinking, if we do have assured mutual destruction, and we do have a nuclear winter that lasts for a generation, these three elements out of which all life came will not be contaminated.
What was the importance of Beuys, of Joseph Beuys? I mean, we talked about Arte Povera, but I was thinking, I mean, he, in terms of material, he used lead. I was wondering if Beuys was a...
I think Beuys was really, for me as a student, maybe the most important single influence because of his absolute belief in art as a transformative social process in terms of human consciousness, but also in terms of the evolution of society. His resistance to early minimalism and conceptualism, and certainly to, in a way, the proliferation post-Second World War of American art, was to say, no, just because we have dark periods in our history doesn't mean to say that we don't have a duty to continuity.
And now we go from the past, we go back to the extreme present.
So much of the history of art has been about trying to, in some way, capture space. I didn't want to capture it, I wanted to liberate it. I think of this as a high energy, quantum drawing in which all aspects of the orthogonality of the room are put into question. And then to provide an opportunity for people to move about in a way that maybe they don't normally in a museum situation.
Can you tell us about why it's called clearing?
Clearing, I think, for me was about clearing. Let's forget about all body reference. We will clear it of indicators of bodiness. It is just about energy. For me, this was I guess it was a kind of liberation.
It's also a drawing, of course. It's an 8-kilometer drawing, and I think it's interesting. This is a great opportunity, this exhibition, to actually discuss your drawings, because both 3D drawings and 2D drawings, because there are a lot of two-dimensional drawings in the show. Drawing plays an important role in this Royal Academy show.
Drawing plays a very important part in my life. I think drawing for me is a kind of seedbed. You know, it's a fertile ground out of which the work comes. You know, I always carry a book with me, and I'm always thinking about evolutions of sculpture. So this is this idea of a block body and what is their relation. Is one creating the other, or is the one crushing the other? Or I might, this was just watching a Merce Cunningham the other night, drawing in the dark, just trying to capture the moves. Or I might be, another page maybe just trying to evolve, some of these block works.
Well, I love it. This is the heart of everything.
No, but you're right. I think without drawing, without, I mean, I'm sure you're the same with your writing and thinking, that you have to have this, in a way, sedimentation. This is, in a way, discovering what you thought, discovering what you felt, because in the moment of registering it, you give it form. And that's usually the beginning of something. So it's just part of everyday life now. This is a work called Subject, and one of the themes that runs through the show is measuring space, or anyway, thinking that you can articulate it through a mean. And this is the three Cartesian coordinates normally used to describe and design architecture. I think what I've tried to do is to use it as a form of mapping of the internal space of the body.
You talked a lot about this whole complex life under the skin or beneath the skin, and that sculpture obviously has to do with that. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what's under the skin?
I've tried to say that we have come so far in terms of, you could say, the medical examination of the human condition. But I wanted to use that same ability to see beneath the skin for other things, which is really, again, to talk about human potential. I fundamentally believe in the intrinsic connectedness of, as it were, our inner selves and space at large. And I always say the same thing. If you close your eyes, where are you? You're in a space that has no boundary, that has no objects, that is free, that is open, and that is connected to deep cosmic space. And that, for me, is a truth. And you could say, my subject is not about identity or about psychology. It's about trying to accept the potential of that inner extension. And it's a paradox that our body, on the one hand, is a physical thing, an object in the world, but it also contains consciousness that has this potential of infinite expansion. And curiously, we can only key into that when we close our eyes and realize that in the core of our beings, we have this infinity. And you might say that's a very problematic subject for sculpture to try to evoke. But I think that's what I'm trying to do all the time.
Another piece from 2019 is The Matrix.
The Matrix.
And The Matrix brings us to the age of the cloud, because of course we have the computer cloud, the digital cloud.
Well, I think the
So
cloud...
let's go into the cloud.
The cloud is a really important metaphor, I think, for so many things. I'm always saying that, you know, in this room, J.M.W. Turner probably, on varnishing day, put a few finishing touches to, you know, a bit of white lead to lift the light on a sea scene or maybe, lift the sunlight on a cloud. I'm trying to, in a way, also evoke air and space, but as an extension of the mind. So for me, this is very important that this is a cloud, but also a brain, and that it's made up of all of these volumes that are room-sized, 21 room-sized volumes that interconnect. This is the skeleton of all our built environment. But I've tried to take it as a industrially commonly available material and reimagine it so it becomes a drawing. I mean, we talked a lot about drawing, but I think of this as a drawing too.
And we should remember here Hubert Damisch, the great French art historian, because the book Theory of Cloud is really an extraordinary book. And he, of course, invokes Turner and Ruskin. But he also talks about this, the main idea really that linear perspective cannot encompass, in a way, the visual experience of the cloud. It cannot, and that means it's almost like an oppositional element in the system of perspective. I mean, he sort of said, can be a dialectic. So it's of course incredible that in that room where Turner could have been, this happens.
Yeah, and I think that this is me saying, at the beginning of the 21st century, we cannot have that same romantic idea of nature. And that is the biggest challenge for us. How do we use our systems of connectivity, whether that's the web or our urban grid, to reimagine our nature in nature? Within the spaces of our cities and our rooms and our buildings, we have to somehow generate another kind of imagining. And I don't want to think of this as a dark cloud. I want it to be, as it were, this hovering battery of potential.
And that's a great moment to transition to the coordinates.
Yes. This false horizon coordinate that runs through 3 galleries. This is in contrast to this confusion of perspectival frames. Here is a single line that reminds us of the horizon of the sea, but immediately becomes compromised by there being a second one. And this is a moment of confusion. This second one was even more like your eyeline horizon, and then the same degree of disorientation happens as in Matrix. Our mind wants these 2 lines to cohere as an absolute cross, an absolute relation of a pure vertical with a pure horizontal. But if you really concentrate on that, you begin to feel sick, because your eyes are telling you that actually this isn't cohering. And there's an extraordinary moment when they break apart. This is my favorite room in the whole exhibition, because I think this really makes us somehow the subject. And when I say it makes us the subject, then hopefully we make the connection with subject that is in the little western room, the other side of clearing.
And it's also the piece which, of course, leads us into this drawing space. Can we begin with the landscape drawings? Because they are mostly made at night.
Yeah, no, well, all of these are made at night. So here's a landscape, you could say. I probably made that in the northwest coast of Scotland on this peninsula, West Loch Tarbert. This is all at the time when Vicken and I were having children and thinking about, I don't know, the life that 2 bodies that come together make. But then always thinking also about the relationship with the horizon.
And then there are the more performative drawings, in a way, which have to do, I wouldn't say performances, but maybe, they're maybe performative. They're the body prints, which are like actions.
Yeah. No, but this is very recent. This is just literally the impact of me falling onto the paper, having been covered in crude oil. You could say that this connects with that first room. Just the touch of a body in relation to the ground.
And that touch is also there with the clearing drawings, because it seemed to me in the clearing drawings, it's almost a performance when you do them. Can you talk about, because
really,
these are very performative
it's
also.
really about using the rhythm of the body and the arc of the arm, you know, scratching into the paper, so it's not a line that is put on top, it's in the paper. It's like a cardiogram. This is the register of a moment of lived time. What I find extraordinary is that then it has these spatial qualities not unlike the three-dimensional clearing. And here you can see I've indicated a kind of perspectival space.
They're also pretty fast, no?
Yeah, very fast.
And the line, the horizon line, brings us actually to the next space. It brings us to the lost horizon. Something started to happen in your work in the later part of the 80s, which is that you kind of went from the gallery space much more into public space. I want to ask you what prompted you going into public space, because that, of course, also meant a change of material. You started to use iron and started to make these very public sculptures.
I reject the idea that somehow when you move out into the elemental world, you have to call your work public. I think that all art is art.
And we need a new world in a way for it.
Yeah. I think we do. I think that art can exist anywhere. And this is just a meditation on the fact that we are the most upright animals. We always believe somehow that we live in a flat earth, which of course we know isn't true, but we treat it as if it were true. This is an inversion of the fact that we as vertical animals stand vertical all over the surface of the globe. I guess I want you to be liberated from the delusion that somehow the architecture is trying to make you believe, which is that we live in a stable world. This is a spaceship, this planet is a spaceship, this room is moving through space at extraordinary speeds.
So everyone is an astronaut.
Yeah, I think we are all astronauts, absolutely. And I think the challenge in this room was just to somehow allow the work again to be a field in which you have to reorientate yourself.
Beautiful.
And then here we have the evocation of Newton's apple in arrested fall, telling us about the motion of the earth. You know, these are pendulums. They are moving, one that's heavier very more slowly than the other one, but they are telling you about the rotation of the earth and the continual theme of the show, which is the provisionality of edges. So these are both, you could say, planetary bodies, but also human bodies, and also their weight, because this is 6 tons or nearly 6 tons. And now here is the void body in blocks that have made architecture into mass. This is a special resting room that, for me, talks about sculpture in its ancient duty to talk about mortality, but hopefully not in a way of death, but more in terms of accepting the limits.
It also reminds me of a conversation I once had with Zaha Hadid about concrete, because obviously we associate concrete a lot with brutalism. Zaha said, there is actually an opposite way of using concrete, which is more human. Seems to be the case here. No?
But I think that concrete is an extraordinary substance. In an age obsessed with speed, this is our geology. This is a real fossil. This is the record of a lived moment of me inside a box, but now the space of the box has become mass and the body has become space. But I think it's a beautiful material.
It's also a fossil, in the sense of that it's a material which in architecture, of course not at the time when you used it, but today in 2019, we should no longer use as little as possible. It's actually very environmentally difficult. And that leads me to a question, because of course the urgency of the 6 mass extinction leads us to the question of sustainable materials.
Yeah,
So I was
and
wondering how in sculpture.
I think it's urgent for me, so I don't use concrete anymore. I think I have to think very carefully about every single time I cast a work. I'm hoping that I'm using material to change people's minds, but also to make them aware of their responsibility and relationship to the limited resources of the planet. So I'm making more work in wood now, and I've begun to work in clay. So that's the last work here.
And before we come to this work, we're going to go through the cave. And the cave has a lot to do, of course, with what Anthony Liedler calls dark space. And cave is, of course, also has a kind of a dimension of a building. Can you tell us about the genesis of cave and how you did that work for the first time?
I'm very pleased with this, that you see through this Renaissance doorway a chaotic jumble, almost like a city after the earthquake. We have this grand princely doorway, and then we have this other threshold, a threshold into the dark, which is smaller than you. In all of these grand doorways, you feel like a prince. Here, you're invited to bend, almost like going into a longhouse in Borneo. And so this invitation to bend down and then become aware, use your whole body as a sensing mechanism to feel your way. There are occasional moments of light, there's a chimney, but then we have to continue into real darkness. This does take you back to something that is pre-cultural. You know, this is like being in a cave in the earth, and that it puts you back into your body in a different way. And I know this is an entirely artificial environment, but at the same time, the acoustics in here, you feel like you've been somehow taken away from the world of the city. I guess I want this to be at the end of the show, and if we think of the show as a whole, as this rite of passage, this is the moment of return into the darkness of the womb, into the inner body of the earth. I mean, that's another theme, I hope, that runs right through from the baby to the first room. What is our relationship with the earth? What is our relationship with the planet that sustains us? And this moment of coming into an inside that is not predicted, I think, by the outside. Even if you walk around the outside of this work, you can't really predict what the feeling will be when you get in it. The fact that the temperature changes, the fact that it has this deep resonance. And then we are released into the final room and have this view onto host. I think again you feel the change in temperature. This is the outside brought in. This is the unformed. This is 30,000 liters of Atlantic mixed with 25 cubic meters of clay brought from Buckinghamshire. And for me, this is saying, this is where we came from. This is something we have to see again. For me, this is again, having been, as it were, released from the darkness of the cave to then see our origins.
And here is your answer also to my question about sustainable materials.
This is clay dug from the ground not far from the Angel of the North. You know, this is, we call this pile because nothing is fixed. They are independent objects that are temporarily associated into a human form.
Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this wonderful little book, which is an advice to a young poet. And I wanted to ask you what, in November 2019, would be your advice to a young artist?
I think just listen to your own work. Really listen to what it is trying to tell you, and then obey it and keep going. I think we don't have any choice. We don't have to wait for the approval of others. The extraordinary thing is that work made with real connection will make connections with others, and others will help you. But all you have to do is just keep working and listen and pay attention to what you already made, and it'll tell you what to do next. It's extraordinary to me that I've had this show in this amazing building. I never dreamt that it would happen, but in a way, it's just been about one step following another. And it hasn't been a lonely journey of kind of pain and isolation. It's been a journey of extraordinary fellowship. People want to make things happen. When they see something that is true or makes a connection with them, they want to help it be. And I think that's my advice. If you just keep going, listen to what you have already made, listen to what your work is telling you, and respond. Nothing will stop you.